So we're reliant on REACH to, keep on top of evidence in terms of chemicals that are harmful and to keep a watch on them, to then impose restrictions. But unfortunately, due to Brexit, we are finding that UK REACH is lagging behind the EU REACH chemical restrictions programme. So it's another area of concern.
We have this very high flame retardant loading in the UK in furniture, and you think, well, why haven't we got a better reduction in fire deaths than the rest of Europe, where they've got similar furniture, similar products? IKEA make two identical looking products, one for the UK market with 10% flame retardant and one for the European market without the flame retardants. And the fire death rate is the same. I think that the obvious conclusion is that because when we showed that the smoke toxicity from burning a piece of UK furniture is much greater than the smoke toxicity from burning a piece of European furniture. So although their furniture may be a bit easier to ignite, usually, and the standard test that has to be withstood in the UK is equivalent to the burning of 4 sheets of newspaper. And I don't think there are many sofas in the UK that actually have fuel loads smaller than that on them in the kind of houses where they're likely to have fires. So, I mean, fires, I think, very typically affect the most vulnerable in society, the oldest, the most immobile, and the poorest, disproportionately. So those typically 250 fire deaths in the UK a year are mostly very vulnerable people. They're not normal people. If you go home and you look at your sofa and you think, oh dear, I'm worried about having a fire, actually, provided you don't charge your mobile phone on the sofa, there are no obvious fire threats. And if it did start to burn, you'd smell it before you needed to worry.
So you're talking about removing the fire tests here, or reducing the...
I'm saying that if we had the same level of fire safety as the rest of Europe, then hopefully we could mimic the same reduction in fire deaths. When you talk about fire safety, I think it's a mistake to talk about flammability resistance to 4 sheets of newspaper. And the important message is to say, how many fire deaths a year does your country have? And I think there are other very meaningful interventions that the fire brigade have done, where they go round, they identify, they look at postcodes and they identify people in those vulnerable categories, and they go round and they ensure the fire safety of their properties, and they make sure that they're aware of the potential threat of fire. And I think that there are habits associated with hoarding and untidiness that also make fires much more severe than they would otherwise be.
Yes, yeah, definitely. What are your thoughts, Joe? You know, how can we reduce fire retardants and ensure that they're being reduced?
Okay, so in addition to reviewing the tests that we use, these really stringent flammability tests for furniture, we could consider using less flammable materials like the polyurethane foam. We could replace materials with materials that are less flammable, like wool, and we can also even consider less toxic alternatives to the potentially harmful, like organic, synthetic chemicals that we're using as flame retardants. So, for example, graphite can provide fabrics, materials with the flame retardancy properties that it needs. So there are ways around it, also through the design of furniture as well. So
I mean, changing the fire retardants and using some ones that are better to people obviously sounds like an easy solution, but a lot of these issues are sort of long-term health issues. So how is there a good way of knowing for sure that it's not going to cause some long-term health issues, and we're not just swapping one product for another dangerous one?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So there have been cases of regrettable substitution, as we would call it, where one chemical has become restricted. For example, the brominated chemical flame retardants that were used in the past, such as Deca-BDE, was discovered to be a persistent organic pollutant that was added to the list of POPs controlled under the Stockholm Convention. And the use of those chemicals in furniture has actually led to the need for upholstered domestic seating waste needing to be incinerated to destroy those chemicals. And in the UK, the system we have for restricting chemicals is called REACH. So we're reliant on REACH to, keep on top of evidence in terms of chemicals that are harmful and to keep a watch on them, to then impose restrictions. But unfortunately, due to Brexit, we are finding that UK REACH is lagging behind the EU REACH chemical restrictions programme. So it's another area of concern. We need the UK to take a stronger stance, and if evidence arises that a chemical that's commonly used in our furniture, for example, is harmful, that stronger, quicker action really needs to be taken. It's very slow at the moment.
And I think it's worth adding that there is a huge time lag, that and I spoke to people from the flame retardant industry after a conference in a bar, and they said that they were ready for the next environmental attack on their product, and they had the next product ready to launch as soon as that one had been banned. And so, if you like, what we call regrettable substitution, they see as a necessary part of their business model. And so you have this particular situation where in furniture, it's probably a new flame retardant will be introduced to the furniture. It will then be in use for between 10 and 20 years. And then within that 10 and 20 years, it'll be identified as a persistent organic pollutant. So that would mean that it has to all be incinerated at 800 to 900 degrees in order to safely dispose of it, even though at the time that it was introduced to the furniture, it wasn't considered harmful.
Yeah, because I'll talk a bit about the government proposals and which are in place for furniture and furnishings at the moment, and one of them is that manufacturers must consider the hierarchy of toxic chemicals, and is that just based on REACH and the sort of existing knowledge of toxic chemicals?
So UK REACH, it will be the system that keeps a watch on the chemicals being used. But that's separate to the fire safety regulations. The fire safety regulations that have been proposed, this new approach, plan to use like a flame retardant hierarchy. And that is the system where manufacturers need to kind of show that they've been trying to make products without chemical flame retardants. And our concern as an environmental charity is that this hierarchy won't go far enough to encourage innovation, and there's no quantifiable reduction targets. So businesses will be able to perhaps use loopholes to say that we've tried to redesign furniture or remove flame retardants, but actually it's not enforced. If they can't remove them, they can go to the default position of continuing business as usual with chemical flame retardants.
Yeah, which they can consider it and say that this was the most cost-effective solution, and those ones weren't cost-effective for our business model, so we haven't gone ahead with them or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Does seem concerning. And the other step seems to be the smart labelling system, which is sort of making it clearer to the customer that it's got fire retardants in, and which ones are there, and sort of relying on the customer being aware of these. Do you think that could be more effective?
I think Fidra are very, keen to see the chemical labelling enforced because for a safe circular economy, we need to understand what chemicals are in products. That would avoid issues with incineration of upholstered furniture. If we knew that the sofa didn't contain like up to 2 kilograms of these active chemical flame retardants, then it wouldn't need to be incinerated. It could be reused. The materials would be easier to recycle. So in terms of the labelling, I think that would be a very good move of government to enforce that. But I do understand that there'll be like commercial sensitivities and also overwhelming consumers with information. But if those labels are carefully designed in a way that the information goes to the right people in terms of the waste managers, recyclers, and it's not an overwhelming amount of information for consumers, but it makes them aware of chemical flame retardants in products. Because we get a lot of concerned members of the public asking us about where could they get furniture that's free of chemical flame retardants, for example. So the public are becoming more aware, but unfortunately it's only the very high-end products that contain less or no chemical flame retardants. So that isn't something that's, affordable to everyone.
Can I add that I think that if the label actually described the chemical composition of the piece of furniture and it was there for consumers, they would then pay the higher price to go for something that was free of flame retardants if it was clearly marked. But I think it's unreasonable to expect consumers to go off to websites and check what the flame retardant composition actually is. The other thing is, and I've talked to the industry about this, they struggle. Most of the upholstered furniture industry are assemblers, and they buy in flame retardant treated fabrics, flame retardant treated fillings from other suppliers, and the other suppliers are reluctant to say what's in their product because the level playing field is such that you keep your intellectual property to yourself. If they were mandated to provide that information, because the one thing government can do is it can say you must provide information about what flame retardants are present. So by demanding that information is provided, you have a very clear route to a much greater openness. And then at the end of life, when you're deciding that all upholstered furniture must be incinerated, you could actually say, no, this half of the upholstered furniture wouldn't need to be incinerated because we can see what flame retardants are present. Yeah,
do you think there should be an education piece alongside this for the general public? I sort of worry that some people would look at a product and go, well, this one's got flame retardants, this must be safer than this one that hasn't got flame retardants.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that whole kind of mismatch and misunderstanding. So the label would perhaps draw out that clarity that's needed.
The label would say that this, if you had a piece of furniture imported from Europe, then it wouldn't have had to meet those fire retardant specifications. If it's got a UK label on, that's saying that it's met those fire retardant specifications. If the label then says this was achieved without using flame retardants, or this was achieved using these flame retardants and lists them, then that's giving the consumer the information that they need.
No, see, yeah.
Can I just add that I think our labelling system really needs to be dynamic in terms of when chemical restrictions take place. We need to be able to inform, everyone across the supply chain and, keep up with those restrictions. Otherwise, if it is just a kind of permanent label, I know that's better than nothing, but that kind of static permanent label that isn't dynamic enough to kind of tell consumers that this chemical has been found to be a persistent organic pollutant, for example, that will cause problems. So we need to think to the future of having kind of digital systems.